Yeah, here we go. Siman Seder Shel Pesach. Here are the simonim, right? The little mnemonics. Kadesh urchatz, so we can do it. Kadesh urchatz, karpas yachatz, magid rochza, metzimatza, morech, keirech, shulchan oirech, tzofon beirach, halal nirtzo. You know, it's interesting, a little Kabbalistic insight. There are 15 steps here, and 15 is a significant gematria. It is tes vav, right? Or, we don't usually say it that way, we usually say tes vav. Why do we say tes vav, by the way? Because like you're counting, go Yud Aleph is 11, right? Yud Beis is 12, Yud Gimel is 13, Yud Dalet is 14, and then when you get to 15, you say tes vav. Why do we say tes vav? Why don't we say Yud? Because Yud and Hey, so you don't say the two letters back to back. Yud and Hey is actually one of Hashem's names. And specifically, Yud Ke Vav Ke is the four-letter name, but then Yud and Hey is also a name, Ka. That's how we say it to avoid saying it. And what is that name? The four letters of Hashem's name correspond to different spherois. So there is basically Yud is Chachma and Hey is Bina. Vav is the six midos, that's why Vav is 6. And then the lower Hey is Malchus. So Yud K is Chachma Bina. And what do we learn from this? That this is a very, people don't realize this, that the whole point of the Seder is Avedis HaMoichin, brain work. And that's why there are 15 steps in the Seder, because that is the numerical value of Yud and Hey, of Chochmah and Bina. The whole Seder is about working out your Chochmah and your Bina and getting to a place of God consciousness where we had self-consciousness. The whole Seder is a mental process, a process of mental liberation. And that's why, to use fancy words here, it is a psychoeducational experience, right? Everything is about understanding ideas and relating to them and internalizing them. And that's the 15. Okay. Kadesh. All right, here's the first step of the 15. Kadesh. You know, there's the little Yiddish sing-song that the school children say with every one of the steps. So Kadesh, wenn der Tate kommt daheim von Schul, macht der Baal Kiddush Kedei, die Kinder sollen nicht einschlafen und fragen, man nicht Tana, right? Kadesh, what is Kadesh? When Tati comes home from Shul, he immediately makes Kiddush, so the children do not fall asleep and they're and are able to ask, man nicht Tana. Okay, I'll tell you a little story about this. One of my favorite stories. The Shpola Zayde. The Shpola Zayde was a Talmud of the Baal Shem Tov, and of the Mezritch Magid. Many of us know the story of the Shpola Zayde with the Hop Kazak. So, but this is a different story. Shpola Zayde at his Seder. Once he went to his little children, and he had children. Shpola Zayde was a father. He wasn't just a Zaydi. To become a Zaydi, you have to become a father. Zaydi was his nickname. Anyways, he came to his little children at the table, and he was asking them to say the little sing-song. So the little kids, they said, Kadesh, wenn der Tate kommt daheim von Schul, macht der Baal Kiddush. That's it. When father comes home from Shul, he immediately makes Kiddush. He says, no, continue. Continue what? The rest of that little line. There's no more line. There's nothing after that. He said, there's nothing after that? They said, no, that's all we learned from our Rebbe in Cheder. So that's very strange, because the whole line is when Tati comes home from Shul, he immediately makes Kiddush, in order that the children shouldn't fall asleep and they should still be able to ask Manishtana. So the Shpola Zayde didn't say anything anymore about that, but the next night at his Seder, the Malamed, the school teacher who taught his children, actually was at the Seder the second night. Apparently he wasn't there the first night, but he was there the second night. And so the Shpola Zayde asked him, he says, you know, my children said, Tate kommt daheim von Shul, macht der Baal Kiddush. He just stated the fact. He comes home and he makes Kiddush. They didn't say the reason that the Kinder sollen nicht einschlafen und fragen man nicht Tana. So the Malama says, yeah, that's right. That's how I taught them. So the Shpola Zayde got very, very serious. He said, why did you depart from the holy custom of the school teachers from time immemorial? This is an ancient custom. And why did you depart from it? He said, I didn't want to burden the kids because the truth is it's not really relevant why Tati makes Kiddush immediately, because the truth is on any Shabbos or Yom Tov, you're supposed to make Kiddush immediately when you come home from shul. It's not specific to Pesach. And so I didn't think that they needed to know the reason why. They just need to know what happens if the father makes Kiddush right away when he comes home from shul. So I just taught them that part. And the Shmuel Zayda said, do you know that each one of these little sing-songs is also speaking on a Kabbalistic level? And they are prayers that we are saying to Hashem. Let me tell you what this line means. Kaddish, what is Kaddish? Kaddish means to sanctify. It's a story about sanctification. Wenn der Tate, Avinu Shebeshamayim, the Father, meaning Hashem, kumt daheim von shul. The night of Pesach, Hashem comes back from shul. He goes and he visits the Jewish places of worship. And he's amazed because he knows that the Jews for weeks have been scrubbing and cleaning and turning their houses over. And they're exhausted, and they were getting the house ready for Pesach and cooking and shopping and buying and then it comes the night of Pesach, and there they are, they're in shul, and they're davening Ma'ariv, and they say Hallel. And so when the father comes home, meaning comes back to heaven from shul, having seen the Jews after weeks of preparation for Pesach, they're in shul davening, he says, wow, look at my beautiful people. Mach der bald Kiddush. He immediately sanctifies the Jewish people. Like Asher Kedishanu b'mitzvesov, you who sanctifies us with your mitzvahs. In other words, like a chosin who's mekadesh a kala. He says, I want to marry them all over again. He falls in love with us all over again based on our coming to shul that night after all the weeks of preparation. And he says, and I better do it bald. I better do it immediately. Why? Kedei as die Kinderloch sollen nicht einschlafen. Because I don't want the children, Bnei Yisrael, who are all called children, to fall asleep. Maybe they will succumb to the numbness of exile. Und fragen manishtana, and they won't even ask, manishtana halayla azeh, why is this night, this gullus, this final gullus, why is it different? Why is it so much longer and harsher than any other gullus? And if I don't immediately renew my vows with them, maybe they will fall asleep and not even ask that question anymore. They won't even know to ask, why is this gullus so long and so harsh? And that's what that song means, and you took it upon yourself to mess with the words. So the school teacher got really, really serious, and everyone in the room got serious, and it was a very somber mood all of a sudden. It was like everyone was... Yeah, you can imagine. Shmuel Zayda just rebuked this school teacher and they told him what this beautiful meaning of this line is, and you didn't say it, and you didn't teach the children to say it. So there was a very, very somber mood in the room, and then all of a sudden the Shmuel Zayda lifted up the spirits and he says, "But it's okay, because even when we are in the dark of night, our Father knows that His children still know how to dance." And he got up and he started dancing around the table with everybody. That's the story. Okay, let's continue here. So we make Kiddush, and don't forget this year, by the way, the Yak Nahaz, because Yom Tov is coming out of Shabbos. But I'm sure you could, we talk about that elsewhere. Okay. So after Kaddish, we have... Urchatz. We wash our hands without a bracha. Yes, it's happened to me more than once that I made the bracha. I once stood there and I reminded 100 people not to make a bracha, and then proceeded to wash and make a bracha. Okay. Then we do karpas. Karpas, you can use your potato, use your onion, whatever you want. You have in mind the moror when you make the bracha adama on the karpas. Yachatz, you break the middle matzah. Okay, maybe you know this story. It was one of my favorite stories to tell at the Seder. When you do yachatz, so there's a story that happened at the Seder of the Tzemach Tzedek, the Einikl of the Balatanya, the third Rebbe of Chabad. Anyways, somebody at the table did yachatz, and you're supposed to put away the big half. I know what's a half means equal sizes. We use the term half colloquially here. The big half, the little half. So you're supposed to put away the big half as afikomen. And by the way, just if you want to know the Kabbalistic custom, we take the big half of the afikomen, we break it into 5 pieces, and that symbolizes the Hegvures, which are the restraining forces of the universe, that the source of all blockage and tzimtzum, and which eventually becomes severity. We want to sweeten those severities. So anyways, we break the afikomen into 5 pieces. Once happened that Rabbi Shais broke the afikomen, it broke into more than 5 pieces, so he put aside the extra piece. At any rate, so back to the story about the Tzemach Tzedek, which also involves the Rabbi Shais. The Tzemach Tzedek, at his Seder, he observed that somebody was doing yachatz, or he had done yachatz, and now he's trying to figure out, I guess he broke it too evenly, he's trying to figure out which side is the bigger side, so he could put the bigger side away for the afikomen, and he was like comparing the two side by side. So the Tzemach Tzedek said to this, whoever it was, a greiser, he said in Yiddish, it sounds better, but a big one that has to establish his being big by way of comparison with another is really not big at all. Flows much better in Yiddish, but the point is that if you have to establish your greatness by way of comparison with others, that you're greater than other people, that's not called being great. Greatness speaks for itself. Anyways, the Rebbe Shais was a child, he heard that. He was the grandson of the Tzemach Tzedek, and he said that from that moment he developed a real keen sensitivity to that particular human attribute, that a person should never try to prove his greatness by not even not putting down others, but even just to compare oneself to others. Okay, let's continue. We have Magid. Okay, Magid is actually telling the story, and Magid starts with Heilach Ma'anyo, which is in Aramaic. This is the bread of our affliction. And then we go into Manishtano, and we spoke a little bit about Manishtano. Manishtano Alayla Azeh, that the Shbola Zayda said, and there's also a whole, a longer explanation from the Rebbe Shais in the Hayem Yem. But Manishtana Alayla Zeh also means this night, meaning this Galus Ho'achrein. Why is it different? Why is it so absurdly long? Okay. Then we begin telling the story. We tell our history of Adam Hayunu Lefare b'Mitzrayim. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. Okay. Va'afilu kolonu chachamim kolonu nevenim kolonu yedim esatayra. Even if we would all be chachamim and nevenim and yedim esatayra. That's Chabad, by the way. Chachamim is chachma, nevenim is bina, yedim is das. So even if we be complete Chabad Chasidim, mitzvah aleinu l'saper b'yitzias Mitzrayim, it's still a mitzvah to tell the story of going out of Mitzrayim. Now, what does that mean? L'saper can mean to tell, like sipur is a story. Also can mean to shine, like an Evan Sapir is a sapphire, to shine. So we shine by telling these stories, by telling the story of our Exodus, and thereby we actually have a Yitzia Meitzarim from our own limitations. Now, based on that, we have an interesting story, because the next thing that happens is Maisa, a story by Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon, Shahayu Mesubim b'Vnei Vrak. These great Tanoim, these great holy sages, were having a Seder together. Now, we just established that even if we were complete Chachamim, Nevenim, Yedim Esatayra, we still have to go out of our limitations. So even if you have great, massive, wide limitations like these sages, you still have to surpass even those limitations. So that's what they were doing. They were sitting all night, Kol Eisei Halayla, like it says, right? V'hayu mesaper b'yitzias Mitzrayim Kol Eisei Halayla. They were. Why was it Kol Eisei Halayla? Why was it all night? Because they have very, very big limitations. Their kalim, their vessels are very wide. But you're supposed to go out of your relative limitations, even if your limitations compared to others would be, expanses. So they were trying to basically fabreng to a point where they would inspire themselves so much that they would like go beyond their normal capacity. That was the idea. Because it says, even if you are chachamim nevenim yedim esatayra, it's a mitzvah aleinu. It's still incumbent upon us, l'saper b'yitzias Mitzrayim, to tell the story, to shine in a way that you actually surpass your capacity. And they hadn't hit their threshold. That was the point, because they had such a incredible threshold for divine inspiration. What can you tell Rabbi Akiva that will blow him away? What hasn't he heard, right? Okay, so they're going and they're going and going. They're trying to inspire each other. What happens? A very odd thing. Ad shabo talmideyam, the students came, v'yamru, and said lohem to them, Rabbi Seinu, our teachers, our masters, he gives my krishma shachris. It's morning shema time. First of all, it's morning shema time. Look out the window. I know it's morning shema time. Why do you need somebody to tell you that? And maybe you need somebody to tell you when the end of the morning Shema is, but the beginning of the morning Shema, you look outside, you see light. Second of all, why is that appropriate for the students to interrupt the masters? The masters are speaking. They're telling the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim in order to experience their own personal Yetzias Mitzrayim. And the students are interrupting? Can you imagine Lubavitcher Rebbe at a Fabrengen, if the Fabrengen would start going till dawn? Do you think anyone would have the chutzpah to say, Rebbe, by the way, it's getting close to dawn? You think anyone would say that? Never happened. Okay. So it's very strange. So here's the explanation. Take, they were trying to hit their capacity and go beyond, to have their own Yetzias Mitzrayim. And they weren't hitting it. But you have to hit it, because it's a mitzvah to experience Yetzias Mitzrayim at the Seder. But here's the catch. If you can facilitate somebody else going out of their Mitzrayim, meaning somebody else hitting their capacity and going beyond, then it is as if it had happened to you. So the students weren't interrupting like, hey, it's morning time. No, they were informing the teachers that the teachers had fulfilled their own obligation of going out of limitations. Yes, you didn't go out of your limitations because your limitations are so expansive and great, masters. But you facilitated us going out of our limitations, and in that respect, it is vicariously as if you had gone out of your limitations. And it is time for Krishma Shel Shachris, they announced. Meaning, not the Krishma Shel Shachris you could see if you look out your window. Maybe that too. Maybe it's literal and figurative. But the figurative level here is what's germane. That they were saying, you brought us to a point of light. You brought us to a point where it is shining for us the echad of Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Your fabrenging about Yetzias Mitzrayim caused us to come to this level. And if you can cause someone else to come to that level, it's as if you had attained it yourself. And, we see this all the time. Sometimes we become spiritually jaded. Could happen, right? You've seen it all. You've heard it all. You're going to tell me a vort that's going to inspire me. The best maybe is I'll hear the vort and I'll say, oh, that's a good one to remember. I'll say that to someone else. But you're going to inspire me. But here's the thing. If you can take it upon yourself to cause somebody else to have an experience that pushes them beyond their spiritual capacity and is a liberating experience, a wow, I can't believe this. This is so beyond anything I ever thought before. Then it's not just you get the assist. It's much more than that. It has that effect on you. And you see this all the time. If you want to recapture the excitement and the wonder of Yiddishkeit, go find somebody and inspire them. And when they experience the excitement and wonder, it's like you're experiencing it again. Okay, let's continue here. We're up to the four sons. Now, there's so much to be said about the four sons, but I'll just share one thought about the four sons. Keneged arba banim dibra Torah. Torah speaks about four children, and that's because there are four different places in Torah where it gives an answer to the child's question about the Seder. And so Chazal explained that the reason there's four different answers is because it's talking to four different children. It says, Echad Chacham, Ve'echad Rasha, Ve'echad Tam, Ve'echad She'ena Yedei Lishel. There's a Chacham, a wise son, wicked, simple, and one who does not know to ask. Okay. So I heard of it. I don't even know the source of it, but it doesn't matter because it's so true. I mean, it matters in as much as attribution, but I'm saying as far as being reliable, it's so true we could rely upon it because we see how true it is. And that is, every single child that a parent has is an only child. I don't mean that just in the sense of attention and love, but I mean that in parenting style. What worked for one child doesn't necessarily work for another child. And we can't force our children to fit each other's molds. We have to see them as completely unique individuals. And that's why when Torah is speaking about the children, when Torah is speaking, it tells you that Echad Chacham, Ve'echad Rasha, Ve'echad Tam, Ve'echad She'ena Yedei Lishel. You don't have a Chacham and a Rasha and a Tam and a Eina Yedei Lishel. No, it's not a grocery list. Echad, 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 each one of them is an only child. Now I'll tell you one more thing. This is from the Rebbe's father, and that is that the word Echad is Aleph, Ches, Dalet. Okay, Aleph is 1, Ches is 8, Dalet is 4. 1, 8, 4 is 13. Yeah? Okay. Now it says Echad 4 times. It says Echad before each of the four sons. So that's 13 times 4. 13 times 4 is 52. 52 is Ben. Base is 2, Nun is 50, 52. So we explicitly have four sons. Chacham, Rasha, Tam, Eina Yedei Lishel. But if you take the gematria of the 4 times Echad, which is 52, you have another Ben, another son, the fifth son, the hidden son. And as the Rebbe explained, that fifth son is the one who's not even at the Seder. The Rasha, at least he's engaged. He might have come to make trouble, but he's showing up at a Seder on Pesach. He knows that's where he belongs. Then there's the fifth son who doesn't even know to go to a Seder. And that's the one that we have to reach out to with love. We have to reach out to all of the sons with love. But that's the one we have to actually bring into the Seder because otherwise he or she is not even going to be there. Okay, let's continue. Here, I'll tell you one of my favorite Seder talking points. I'm going to skip way ahead, a few pages, where we start to talk about the plagues. You know, we pour out a little drop of wine for each of the plagues. Dom ve'esh ve'simras oshan. Oh, you know what? Before I'll tell you one of my favorite ideas from the Seder, I'll tell you a cute word. So there's a Gemara in Shabbos that says that Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi, that's the Tana Rabbi Yehuda, was known as Rosh Medabrim. In fact, the Gemara in Shabbos, I think it's Dav Lamed Gimel. It says, Lama Nikra Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi Rosh Medabrim B'chol Makim. Why is Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi called the head speaker? And then there's a whole story there in the Gemara about the Romans made it official that whenever the Jews get together, Rabbi Yehuda has to be the head speaker. Whatever, that's a whole long story, and it's actually the story of Rashbi in the cave. But the point is, there's a Gemara that says that Rabbi Yehuda was the head speaker. He was always the head speaker. Like they would always give him the mic. Okay. So I heard, b'derech tzachos, like a humorous quip, that why was Rabbi Yehuda always the head speaker? Why did they always ask him to go to the podium? Because, like it says in the Haggadah, that we have the 10 plagues, Dam tzfeide kinim, Arev, Dever, Shkin, Bared, Arbe, Cheshech, Makas, Becheres. And then it says, Rabbi Yehuda haya nesen bohem simonim, datzach hadash b'chav. Rabbi Yehuda took all this list and he gave them acronyms and made it short. Datzach hadash b'chav. So that's why they always wanted me to speak. Because he made things shorter. He knew, like George Burns said, the secret to a great sermon is you have to have a strong opening and you have to have a strong finish, and the two of those things should be as close together as possible. Okay, at any rate. So, okay, here's one of my favorite concepts from the Seder. I'll share with you right now. We're talking about the plagues. It says an interesting thing. Rabbi Yesa Aglili Yemer. He says in Mitzrayim there were the famous 10 plagues, but at the sea there were 50 plagues, right? Like because one plague was called the finger of God. So then, and then in the sea it says they saw the hand of God. So a hand is 5 fingers, 5 times 1, right? 5 times more than 1. So 10 plagues in Egypt and 50 at the sea. Okay, so he's got that's his math. Then comes Rabbi Eliezer Eimer. Rabbi Eliezer says, "Minayin shekol mako maka sheheva kadosh baruch hu al mitzvah b'mitzrayim hoyse shel arba makes." He says every plague was quadruple, was fourfold, and therefore he comes out with a final number, and he has a pasuk. He has a certain scriptural exegesis how he explains that each plague was quadruple. But at any rate, so his final math is, he says, Emer miyata, conclude from this, b'mitzrayim loku arboyim makes. In Egypt there were 40 plagues, not the 10, but the 40, because if each plague was fourfold, so 10 plagues is really 40. V'alayom loku mosai makes, and at the sea there were 200, because if Rabbi Yesi said that there were 50 at the sea, like the difference between a whole hand and a finger. So now if we're saying, if Rabbi Yesi says 10 in Egypt and 50 at the sea, so Rabbi Eliezer is saying 40 in Mitzrayim and 200 at the sea. Now, not to be outdone, Rabbi Akiva Eimer, Rabbi Akiva comes along and says, "Menayin shekol mako sheva kodesh baruch hu ala mitzrim b'mitzrayim hoyse shel chomesh makes." He has another way of darshaning a pasuk. It's actually the same pasuk, but he explains the same pasuk Rabbi Eliezer uses, but he darshans it a little differently. And he says that every makkah was fivefold, was quintuple. Is that the right word? And therefore, how do you conclude? Emer miyato. B'mitzrayim loku chamishim makes, that in Egypt it wasn't 10 plagues, it was 10 quintuple plagues, which is 50. V'alayom loku chamishim mosai makes, and therefore at the sea it was 10 times 5 times 5, right? Because Rabbi Yesi says that the difference between a finger and a hand, which is 5, and then each plague to begin with is quintuple, is times 5. So at the sea you have 250 Makkos. I don't know if you're following all that math, but it does work out. Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit. What's going on here? Basically, each of these Tanaim is describing the depth to which Tumas Mitzrayim had taken hold. The plague was to knock out the negative energy. But how deeply did the shock waves have to reverberate? Well, as deeply as the negativity had taken hold. And so Rabbi Yesi says that it only had to, a plague was a plague. Okay, in Egypt there were 10, at the sea there were 50, but each plague was a plague. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, a plague wasn't a plague. Every plague was 4 plagues. Rabbi Akiva says, no, a plague wasn't a plague. Every plague was 5 plagues. What they're talking about is whether the tumah, the negative energy, had affected only the outer appearance of things, or if it had seeped into an elemental level. Rabbi Yasi says, no, it only affected the outer appearance of things. So for instance, the first plague, the blood, when the water turned to blood, it was just the appearance of the water turning to blood, but it wasn't on an elemental level. When I say elemental, I don't mean like the atoms that we have on the periodic chart of elements, but I mean the Daled Yesodis. Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Afar. Right? Earth, wind, and fire. Remember that from the 70s? R&B group. Fire, air, water, and dirt. So Rabbi Eliezer is saying that when, for instance, the water turned to blood, it wasn't just on the level of its appearance, it was actually on an elemental level, that not just the water, but the fire in the water, the air in the water, the dirt in the water, they all had to be affected by the plague, because that's how deeply the impurity had seeped in. Okay. Now, why does Rabbi Akiva say 5? Where does he get 5? Because behind the Daled Yesodis, behind the 4 elements, which, by the way, it's interesting. There's a letter from the Rebbe in English. He was writing to a scientist who asks about, well, why are there 4 elements? In the periodic chart of elements, you have so many more. So the Rebbe says, talking about 2 totally different things. And if you want to find a parallel to modern science, probably the closer parallel would be states of matter. So like plasma, gas, liquid, and solid. So the fire would be plasma, and the air would be gas, and water would be liquid, and the earth would be solid. Okay, but at any rate, Rabbi Akiva says the tumah was even deeper. It was to the level of the Chaymer HaYu'uli. Chaymer HaYu'uli means primordial matter. That's the most basic building block of existence, of material existence, which even the 4 elements are built from. And so Rabbi Akiva says that the plagues had to hit that deeply. So it wasn't just the fire of the water, and the air of the water, and the water of the water, and the earth of the water, but it was the primordial matter behind the fire of the water, and the air of the water, and the water of the water, and the earth of the water that had to be struck by the plagues. And it's interesting, by the way, that as far as the halachas of bir chametz, of destroying chametz, we find each of these sages are consistent with these opinions. Because Rabbi Yasi says to destroy chametz, all you have to do is destroy its form. You can just tear it up and throw it in the wind. But and Rabbi Yasi says that the plagues they only had to strike as deep as the outer appearance of the things in Mitzrayim. But the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, which is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, which is you can only destroy chametz through sreifa, through burning, because you have to actually destroy it on an elemental level. At any rate, what does this have to do with us? As we know, Yetzias Mitzrayim isn't something that just happened historically, it's something that happens all the time. Happens every single day, but especially on the night of the Seder, when we come back around to that place in the cycle of time, and the energy of liberation is available again, just as it was the first time, and even more, and even more. So we have to know the following. The Yetzer Hara has affected us And when we destroy the chametz, we actually say, just like we're destroying the chametz, Hashem should, destroy the Yetzer Hara, should get rid of our evil inclination. It's affected us. Yeah, but how deeply has it affected us? So, Rabbi Yossi would say, only externally. Meaning, it can make you sin, but it can't creep into your insides. Rabbi Eliezer would say, yeah, actually it could. It could get into you, and it could affect you on 4 levels, which is why he says every makkah had to be 4-fold. It could affect your nefesh, your ruach, your neshama, your chaya. So it's not just it affects your behaviors, but it could get into your emotions, right? That's ruach. It could even get into your thinking. That's your neshama. Or it could even get into your sense of spirituality, your chaya, your desire to surrender to Hashem could also be tainted to some degree. It's interesting that Rebbe gives an example. What would it be to experience a Mitzrayim on the level of chaya? So he says there was a guy once, he bragged that when he says Shema, he meditates on Echad for a whole minute, exactly a minute. He looked at the clock to know that it was a minute. So the point is, it's not Chas v'Shalom he's doing anything bad, right? Only on the lowest level, Mitzrayim of behavior, that's where a person's actually Chas v'Shalom doing Avedas. These other levels are much more subtle. The level of Ruach is he feels the attraction, an emotional attraction to the Avedas. He doesn't do them, he just feels it. Or the level of Neshama is the Seichel, where he's thinking in a way that is, selfish and not holy. The level of Chaya could be he's surrendering to Hashem, but even within that surrender, there's a self-imposed limitation. So he's thinking oneness for a minute, but exactly a minute, and he looks at the clock to make sure to know when he's done. So it reminds me of the guy who used to brag that when he's davening, he's completely lost in dveikus. So another guy got sick of it, and he snuck up on the other guy when he was davening Shemoneh Esrei, and he poked him with a needle in the middle of Shemoneh Esrei. And the guy had to pretend he didn't feel it. So he poked him again, and finally the guy turned around and he said, "Stop stabbing me." He's like, "You said that when you're davening, you're lost in dveikus, you don't feel anything." He says, "Well, I didn't feel it the first time." I didn't feel it the first time. Okay. Anyways, and that's why Rabbi Eliezer says the plagues had to hit onto the elemental level, the 4 levels, the Daled Yesodis, which in terms of the human soul correspond to the 4 soul levels. But that leaves us with Rabbi Akiva. Why does Rabbi Akiva say 5? What's with 5? So just like we were talking about, before, there's the 4 elements, and there's the Chaimer HaYu'uli, the primordial matter that makes up the elements. So too, in the soul, there are different aspects of the soul, and then there's the core of the soul itself, which is called Yechidah. And it's the 5th level, which is not a level at all. Many of you studied Kuntras and Yonah Shel Teres Chassidus with me, and we spoke about that at length, how the Yechidah is the core of the soul, the essence of the soul. It's not any particular level. It is just the most basic identity of the soul, which if you strip everything else away, all the form and all the way the soul manifests itself, and you just get to what is it itself, right? Which is ultimately it's godliness, and that's why it's called Yechidah, because that means oneness. It's one with God. So, and that's that 5th level. Like on Yom Kippur, we daven 5 times to engage the 5 levels, and that's how Kapara works on Yom Kippur, because you could have tainted your nefesh or your ruach or your neshama or even your chaya, but you can never taint your Yechidah, because the Yechidah is one with God, and it's pristine, and it is what would be the word? It is impervious to corruption, right? Okay. And yet Rabbi Akiva says 5 levels. Why? Because Rabbi Akiva recognizes that there could even be the necessity for Yetzias Mitzrayim on the level of Yechidah. Now, that's a wild concept, because the whole idea of Yechidah is that the Yechidah is impervious to corruption. It is inherently pristine. intrinsically pristine. It can't be corrupted. So where's Rabbi Akiva coming along? And that's the whole mechanics of Yom Kippur. So where's Rabbi Akiva coming along and saying that we could need a makkah that would reverberate so deeply that it would dislodge any tumah that had attached itself to Yechidah? How could tumah attach itself to Yechidah? And the Rebbe explains, you know why Rabbi Akiva understood this? Because he was a Ben Gadim. His parents were converts to Judaism. So Rabbi Eliezer didn't understand that. Rabbi Eliezer had yichus. And so he understood that a person could experience internal exile to a certain level, but he didn't understand that there could be an internal exile so deep where, for instance, a person is divorced from his true self, which is the idea of a ger, is realigning himself with his true spiritual identity. Rabbi Akiva had that sensitivity, and he knew that that could happen to a person, and that a person would need an exodus on that level as well. Anyways, like I said, that's one of my favorite Seder thoughts. I find it really, really, really powerful. I'll leave you with one more thought, and this is one that I made up, but maybe we'll find a source for it. You know, there's some people who they love to have a chiddush, and they feel bad when they find out that it wasn't their chiddush. My feeling is I don't want to have a chiddush, but mitzad, amarotzis, because I'm an ignoramus, so sometimes I think it's a chiddush, but if you can find that it's not a chiddush, then I'm much happier that way. So if anyone has a source, I would love to hear it. It's not even such a chiddush, it's just a davar apashat, it's just an obvious thing. You have the dayenos, right? Ilo hitziyanim mitzrayim v'lo yasavahem shvatim dayen. Ilo yasavahem shvatim v'lo yasav v'lo heyam dayen. And then we go on and on and on. Dayenu. So the question is, if it was really enough, then why did, it's like when you go to your grandmother's house and she's like, do you want another piece of mandelbread? And you say no, because she knows she's going to give you another piece, right? Okay. So it's like, oh yeah, it's enough, Hashem. It's really enough. Well, you're saying it's enough because you know he's going to keep going. Is it really enough or it's not enough? Why we sing Dayenu? Or are we only sing Dayenu in retrospect because we know he did all of those things, right? In retrospect, oh, it's enough. It would have been enough. Yeah, okay. But at that time, would you have really told him to stop? And here's what I understand. It doesn't say die. It says Dayenu. Dayenu. It would have been enough for us. But this whole thing wasn't about us. It was about him. Hashem had an agenda, why he needed to take us out of Mitzrayim and bring us to Matan Torah and bring us to Eretz Yisrael with a Beis Hamikdash. Like the whole Dayenu story there. It's a story from going out of Egypt to coming into Eretz Yisrael and building the Holy Temple. Maybe it would have been enough for us. We would have been satisfied. Dayenu. But it wasn't enough for him. He had bigger plans for us. And I think that's just a general guide in life. A lot of times we are sufficiently, stable. I'm talking about not material stuff, because in material stuff we always want another million and another million and another million. But I'm saying in spiritual stuff, we're like, okay, we're good. You know what? It's not about us. It's about Hashem. Hashem has an agenda, and Hashem's agenda is to go all the way and ultimately to perfect the entire world, to bring Mashiach, to bring peace to all humanity. And anything short of that is not enough for him. Might be enough for us, but it's not enough for him. Okay. Thanks for joining me. And the Mitzvah Hashem will do a little bit more Seder prep next week.